Good evening, you're watching The Smoking Section. My name is Emily Ouija, and tonight I had another guest planned, but unfortunately that's fallen through, so we're hopefully going to postpone that for another time. But luckily, I've got another guest who is willing to come on. This is Michael Keene, who's of Charlestown, Boston.
That's correct.
Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on the show at such short notice.
Sure, no problem.
Just as a word of intro, Michael is a non-smoker, a lifelong non-smoker. But he's also very much not an anti-smoker. I'll just say as a preface. I think you're probably one of the few never smokers I've known who is completely not anti-smoking.
Yeah, there might be
double negatives with that.
There might be more people like that out there than we realize.
I think there might be. I think you're right. I mean maybe it's through association, through knowing me. Do you think that you've kind of solidified those views? What do you think?
Probably somewhat, but I think I've always kind of thought maybe some of the rules and regulations a little crazy and
well, that's
out there.
That's interesting. So when did you first start noticing that the regulation was going a bit too far? I mean, do you I suppose you remember quite clearly when there were first indoor smoking bans in bars and restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, restaurants might have been a bit earlier in Cambridge and Boston, but I know that the bar smoking bans were around, 2006, 2007?
Yeah, probably something like that, maybe even earlier around here.
And I mean, you're someone who went out quite a bit to bars to see bands.
Yeah.
Was it something that bothered you at the time when you went out, even though you were a non-smoker?
No, I wouldn't say it bothered me. I still remember the old days, like going to a club and I'd come home really reeking of smoke, but...
Right, did that bother you?
No, not really.
Right. Yeah, I was
thinking... It's just part of the atmosphere, I'd say.
Right, I agree with that. I always thought it was funny when I saw that people, would complain about coming home from a bar or from a show and saying I had to take a shower and wash my clothes. And it's kind of like, don't you take a shower every day anyway, and don't you wash your clothes after wearing them? Maybe some people don't, but so I always thought that was funny. And I think it's more of an excuse that people use. But one thing I've noticed is that since indoor smoking bans have become more prevalent, I think people have become more aware of tobacco smoke in the air. Mm-hmm. So I do think it's slightly a physiological thing as well.
Yeah, and then from there the outdoor bans. Those I don't get those.
Just
really.
I know, right? I know.
The you can't smoke on a patio, things like that.
So
you can't smoke in parks, things like that.
So you as a non-smoker find this ridiculous, and I know that you've actually spoken up at Cambridge Council meetings when they were debating actually banning smoking. I believe it was the park smoking bans that they were debating at the time. That's right, and you actually stood up as a non-smoker and spoke against that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just how they keep pushing it further and further, and it just seems more ridiculous, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Well, we were talking about this earlier. We touched on it a little bit. Was why people have done this and why do they keep pushing it further? And I was saying a little bit about how I thought it was about control and about wanting to push that control further and further. Do you think that that's the reason why these regulations just keep going further?
Yeah, I'd say so, and kind of they need something to do, something to just keep moving on and on and on with it.
Well, that's true on some level. I think there's people now who have made their careers out of anti-smoking, mm-hmm. And obviously they have to keep that going. Maybe they even believe a lot of what they're spouting.
Yeah.
But I know as a political as for your political views, would you describe yourself as being libertarian or more conservative?
I probably say conservative, but the smoking thing goes along with that, like having beliefs in just as much freedom as possible, and mm-hmm. all the rules and regulations of smoking just goes against all that, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. And are there any other examples you can think of in your own life? And even though you don't smoke, can you foresee that it could happen with anything else in your life that you enjoy? Do you think that there's any other regulations that are underway that are going to try to restrict people's behaviors in different ways?
Yeah, I know sometimes the health people go after alcohol. They go after what's considered junk food or
Right.
something like that.
Right. Although what is junk food?
True, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here and there you see them trying different routes to go with that.
Right. Right.
And who knows how far they could advance, I guess.
Well, so I mean, do you think it's important for people to speak up against this kind of regulation? And if so, how can people do that?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think most people deep down value their freedoms, but I think people don't think about other people's freedoms sometimes, you know. So what to do about it, that's tough. There is the political, you go to meetings, you voice your opinions to whatever politicians, but you can do that. Who knows how often it works, you know.
Right. Well, I know that you for example are an avid reader of the newspaper. You like to read 2 newspapers a day.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Do you think, I mean, I know that right now people have been speaking very negatively about the mainstream media and the press. Do you think they're reading, 2 fairly mainstream newspapers every day? Do you think that you're getting a biased view? Do you think you're getting a fair view of current events?
I guess between newspapers, just a lot of websites, I try to get all different sides of whatever is going on. So I think try to see what both sides are saying.
That's great. That's great. And do you notice, even as a non-smoker, do you feel that social life in general is different now since smoking bans? I mean, I know it might be a difficult question to answer because it's very subjective. It could also have to do with maybe being a different time in your life. You're not in your 20s anymore and maybe not going out as much. But, do you think subjectively that it's less fun to go out now, maybe less sociable?
Yeah, it is kind of odd, I'd say. Say if you go to a bar and most of your friends head outside to smoke.
Right, that's actually something I wanted to ask you about because as a non-smoker...
Usually I'm the one remaining inside.
You're often one of the few people remaining inside, which is interesting. And I can imagine that must be no fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For 5 minutes I just gotta twiddle my thumbs.
Right. Right, that's an interesting perspective, and I can't say that I've actually ever thought about that as much, but it's definitely true. And I think what you mentioned earlier, too, about going to see bands, and there not being any smoking anymore, it takes away a certain ambiance, I think, from the experience of seeing live music and being certain kind of dive bars. I think that was all part of the atmosphere was the smoke, and I think there was something about it that made it kind of cozy and welcoming, and maybe also a little bit gritty in a certain sense. And I think that's really lacking now.
Yeah. Especially probably the kind of older people who are used to that. That's just part of the whole thing. Like how we saw the guy from Oasis was playing in New York.
Oh, right, Liam Gallagher. That's right. Yeah.
He was denied.
Right.
Because he didn't have an ID.
That's right, and so I think I want to say about a year ago, New York State and New York City, if I'm not mistaken, both raised the legal age to buy tobacco to 21. It was 18 before that. So I tend to think he's 40. I want to say 44 years old.
Yeah.
So he didn't have ID and he was refused the sale of cigarettes. And I think it had something to do with the fact that the age has been raised because once it's 21, I think they tend to be very. It's the same with alcohol. I mean, they say if you look like you're under, 50 now, then they're gonna card you.
And with him, and if you know the band Oasis, it's just cigarettes are a big part of just the whole culture with them. And
absolutely,
stuff.
They have that song "Cigarettes and Alcohol."
Yep. Yeah. So it's just kind of odd,
Yeah, it is. I know that Liam's brother Noel has also spoken out quite often against smoking bans.
Yeah.
From what I've read.
Good to see some musicians stand up.
Yeah, I think so. It seems to be my experience with musicians that they don't tend to be very activist against smoking and smoking bans, which I understand because I think in some ways they're dealing with Number one, kind of having to protect their public image and not want to piss off too many people. But I think on the other hand, it's also just their style of that's not their thing. That's not politics, and activism isn't really their arena. And I think a lot of them though just deal with it in their own way of just smoking on stage sometimes when they're not supposed to, and just defying smoking bans in other ways that I think also speak very loudly, even without a form of traditional activism.
Yeah, and you can look at athletes too, how they banned chewing tobacco for baseball players.
Right.
It seems like they've mostly, you haven't heard a word about them rebelling against that.
Is that right? I mean, I thought I had heard, at least in the beginning, that they were still just doing it, but that they weren't showing it on TV. Have you heard anything about that?
They might be getting away with it like that. It's hard to tell, I guess.
It's really hard to tell. I think you'd have to really have someone who is an insider somehow to a major league team to really be able to gauge it.
Yeah.
It's probably not something anyone wants to talk about anymore.
Yeah.
But it would really, I think, it would really piss me off about that ban, many things, but I think one of them was that there's a Major League Baseball Players Union, is that right? Like an association. And I think that they had first been pressured by anti-tobacco campaigners to ban, chewing tobacco for baseball players in their union, and they had refused basically because I think they actually took a vote among players, among members, and they didn't want to do it. So then when they moved in and they made the ballparks start to ban it, it was really just a way of union busting, of getting around the fact that this players union said, no, we don't want to do this.
Yeah.
So to me, it was very sneaky on that level, and the fact that smokeless tobacco is now banned in many stadiums, it makes it much worse in a way because it's actually also expanding beyond the professional players, but going also to the people who are entering the stadium or the ballpark.
People in the crowd.
Right. I mean, whether that's being enforced or not, I don't know. I've actually not heard of any real enforcement of that, but that's it's not really the point. The fact that there now exists a law which says you can't have smokeless tobacco inside of a ballpark, is frankly ridiculous and really just violates people's personal liberties to such an extent that it's quite frightening.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, and I often wonder, what is the impact of this kind of legislation that, in a way, is just really hard to enforce. You have to wonder, is there harm to that kind of legislation that can't be enforced? Do you think?
It seems just doing it for the sake of, we passed this law is this new thing you can't do. Right. So
do you think it undermines people's trust in authorities a little bit? I think for me it does. I would say.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
You can go with the old cliche, how about they focus on something else, a little more important.
Right.
Pick your choice. Right. Of whatever.
Well, what would you consider more important than banning smokeless tobacco?
Anything, clean up the litter or something, anything, help the homeless, how about that?
Although smokers are often accused of littering, which is one thing we at Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights have been trying to combat in Cambridge by our installation of the smoking butler cigarette receptacles. You might have seen there's been some advertisements rotating on CCTV on all channels, filmed by the wonderful Christina Kerr and starring Johnny Barash and Stephen Helfer. So if you haven't seen those, watch out for them. And if you're in Central Square or Harvard Square in Cambridge, do watch out for the cigarette butlers. They're kind of aluminum or steel boxes that are affixed to street signs, and we're trying to encourage smokers to use them. And one other thing, sorry to go on a rant here, but one thing that always distressed me a lot about indoor smoking bans was that they basically just forced smokers out onto the street. Didn't give them any ashtrays anywhere. So that, they're basically saying, just go and smoke outside. So then smokers would go smoke outside, and then they would just toss their butts on the street because there's nowhere else to put them. And then smokers were blamed for littering. So I always found it was very unfair. And I think that at this point in time, enough time has gone by that a lot of smokers have really kind of forgotten even what ashtrays are, or how to use them. So it is a bit of a challenge to even get smokers to use these kind of receptacles outdoors. So we're hoping that it will make a difference, but at the same time, we're not trying to blame smokers for this litter problem, but we're just trying to provide a solution that will work for everyone.
I actually noticed downtown Crossing, there's a few of those smoking right outside one of the bars.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
I'll have to take a look at those. I always thought it would be a great idea for more bars to pursue that. I mean, you do see the big the tall skinny ones with the big base. You see those occasionally outside bars, but not often enough, I don't think.
Yeah.
It always seemed crazy to me that bars wouldn't just install them of their own volition. I don't know why, but it's a good idea.
And actually, something else I noticed today. I was cutting through one of the small parks in downtown Boston, where smoking is now technically banned, and it was like a decent amount of people that came out. You could tell on this from work on a break, and multiple people just smoking.
We're
in the park.
smoking. Interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in Boston, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say Boston, smoking is banned in all public parks. I don't think that there's any exceptions to that.
Yeah,
Although
so.
there might be some technical exceptions just based on what's considered like a city-owned park or not. So in Cambridge, smoking is actually not banned in all public parks yet, due in part to our efforts to fight against that. So in Cambridge, it's actually only smaller parks. But in Boston, it's banned in all parks, including the Common and the public gardens, which are the biggest and most famous parks in Boston. I hadn't heard much about enforcement yet, so it's interesting just to hear this, that you've seen a lot of people smoking in a smaller park.
Yeah, and it was going along fine. I saw non-smokers, and people weren't fighting over it.
Right.
They're just enjoying it together.
Well, I mean, you have to wonder how the Boston police, or the Cambridge police feel about these kind of regulations where, you wonder if they really have, I'm sure that they have very little desire to enforce something like a park smoking ban.
Yep.
Especially when, as we've pointed out countless times, park smoking bans really unfairly target homeless people who like to hang around the park. A lot of them don't have anywhere else to sit around, to socialize. So it unfairly targets them, as well as any other citizens who want to enjoy the park. But I'm sure that the police have no desire to go and start picking fights with homeless people, or
Yeah, that's another time you can say there's better things to do.
Right.
More important things to take care
there's
of.
definitely better things to take care of in Boston, I think, for the police than telling people to stop smoking.
Yeah.
And people have pointed out to me that it's often tourists who are smoking in the Boston Common, and I think, well, that's even worse to me. A lot of tourists might be here from Europe or from countries where they don't yet have the horror of outdoor smoking bans as strongly as we do. And they're coming here as tourists hoping to enjoy themselves, and they're in the world famous Common or the public gardens, and a policeman comes up to them and tells them to stop smoking. It must be completely bewildering to them, and frankly, I think probably is quite a turnoff.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, it makes me feel embarrassed, but yeah.
Probably ruins the experience a little for them.
Well, so if you're and we were saying earlier that it didn't really bother you having indoor smoking. What about, outdoor smoking? Can you imagine that it actually bothers anyone outdoors? Or if it does, wouldn't you imagine that someone could just ask the smoker to move away, or to
that seems like a decent compromise. Someone can move their seat or wherever they're standing.
Absolutely.
I think that should be fine to help. I just don't see how it could bother someone that much.
Right. Well, so there's a lot of talk, something that's on my mind a lot lately is that there's always a lot of talk about discrimination of various groups. I think one group that people don't think about as being discriminated against are smokers. So have you ever thought about that? Do you think that smokers are actually being discriminated against at this point in time?
Yeah, I'd say so. Just the constant trying to find new ways to, I guess, prevent them from smoking, I guess.
Well, that's what it is. Actually, it's quite perceptive that you even say that, because I think a lot of people still believe that the point of smoking bans is to protect non-smokers.
Yeah.
But I think it's becoming painfully obvious, even to a non-smoker such as yourself, that the real point is just to actually force them to stop smoking, or prevent them from smoking, at least in as many circumstances as possible. And so on a basic level, how do you feel about that kind of government intervention? Do you think that it's right to basically use legislation to force people into a certain kind of behavior?
No, I think they were all once 16, 18, whatever.
Right.
I think you're smart enough at that point to decide if you want to smoke.
Well, now it's actually 21.
Yeah, 21. So I'd say 21, you can you should be able to decide on your own.
Certainly by 21.
Yeah.
You should I think by 18 you're old enough to know, as a matter of fact. But
And
yeah.
you can weigh the risks if enjoyment versus possible health risks.
Right. Well, especially, I mean, with tobacco, to me, it always made a lot of sense that actually the age was 18 because, I mean, personally, I think it could be even younger. But, the fact that it was 18, it was just lower than the drinking age of 21. The drinking age of 21, I'm also not particularly crazy about, but I can grudgingly admit that there's an issue in a lot of parts of the U.S. with people driving, because if you live in a place where the public transportation isn't very good or you can't walk, then you really do have to drive. So I can see that there's some problems with that. So, I would grudgingly accept, okay, the age is 21, that's the way it is, it's probably not going to change. But with smoking, I mean, smoking tobacco does not impair you mentally. In fact, it can sharpen you mentally. Whereas alcohol, unfortunately does impair you, or can impair you.
Yeah.
So it really doesn't make much sense that the age is 18, or the age is 21 now.
Yeah.
When there's really that has no effect on driving, on anything like that.
Just think for going back how long? Decades and decades. 16.
Oh, yeah. I mean, all those ages have creeped up gradually, right? I mean,
the world continued on when there were 16-year-old smokers,
Well, it's interesting, actually, that you bring that up, because, I mean, wouldn't you think that as we progress as a human race, that we should be growing more and more mature at a younger age than...
I'd say so.
So why is it that all of these ages keep being raised higher and higher?
If you have a 3-year-old on an iPhone, I think a 16-year-old can decide if they want to smoke or not.
I agree with you. I think it's interesting that as our society advances in many ways, we seem to find ourselves trusting ourselves less and less. At least that's the way it appears to me.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just that we have to keep regulating things because we have nothing else to occupy ourselves with. I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to talk. We have a few minutes left. I want to talk briefly about taxes because I know that that's something you feel strongly about. Not taxation and not about tobacco because that doesn't personally affect you. But I do know that you have some opinions about taxation in general, especially in Massachusetts. And I know that you're aware that a few years ago there was an initiative to get a question on the ballot which would get rid of the, I believe it was the state tax on, or at least lower the state tax on tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, Massachusetts has the second highest tobacco excise tax in the U.S., second only to New York State. And as Jeff Yalanesian of Brennan Smoke Shops loves to point out, it's actually there's a tax on a tax. So the state excise tax is actually on top of the federal tax.
Yeah.
So a tax on a tax, as he loves to say, is unconstitutional,
Yeah.
which I would agree with. How do you feel about that? I mean, do you think that it relates a lot to what we were just talking about? Just trying to keep pushing and forcing people to quit. And taxation is used as a classic example of that. People repeat over and over, well, we need to raise the taxes to force people to quit.
Yeah. Already they're more than high enough.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason for that.
Right.
Yeah, I think they're already screwing over the smokers.
Yeah. Well, again, I mean...
More than necessary.
I mean, it goes back to that, is it ethical to use taxation to try to control people's behavior? And then, to be cynical about it, well, I think, really they're trying to do two things at once. They're trying to raise the taxes to supposedly discourage people from quitting. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the government is raking in a lot of money from this.
Yeah,
so,
right.
It's kind of like having your cake and eating it too. You can say that you're trying to discourage behavior, and yet really, if everyone stopped buying cigarettes, then there'd be a huge hole in the state coffers, for sure. And as you know, I mean, living in Boston, we all know that people drive to New Hampshire to buy cigarettes, right?
Yeah, everyone. You always hear about that.
Right, in New Hampshire, I don't know off the top of my head what the tax is, but it's much lower than Massachusetts. And that's taking away business from our state, right?
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a old tradition. You save, I don't know myself, but you save so much money just driving half hour.
So how far back do you remember people doing that?
Oh, since I was a little kid.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's an old tradition.
That's interesting. I'll have to look up what the rising progression of the taxes has been. But I'm sure it's always been cheaper in New Hampshire, basically.
Yeah.
So are we still living in Massachusetts, or is that era over?
Oh, it's still pretty bad, I'd say.
I'd say as far as tobacco is concerned, it's definitely
Yeah.
true. Although they seem to be trying to just shed that image in other ways, right?
Allegedly.
Allegedly. I'm gonna pull up our website graphic before we say goodbye. But Stephen Helfer should be back next week. And hopefully the guest that we wanted to have tonight might also be available to come on next week. We'll see about that. We'll make sure we let you know about that. Mike, thanks so much for joining us.
Sure.
I'm just trying to get this input up. It doesn't seem to be working. I believe we're having an equipment malfunction because I cannot get our website graphic on the screen. But